All right, here we go. I can't find where I was supposed to read from, so we're just going to roll right into it. I'm Chris from Crash Canon, and I've got a pretty cool guy with me on the side I'm not pointing to. There with this side. And Rob,
I'm like, who else is with you?
Yeah, it's this guy over there. You can't even see him. So, Rob, who are you? What do you do?
So I'm the kind of co-host and producer, the sidekick to Anthony over at Avoiding Babylon.
Sidekick. Aren't you guys like co-owners, all that fun stuff?
Yeah, but I mean,
you're not Robin.
What was it?
You're
not Robin. No,
No,
definitely not Robin. How would I put it? I don't know. I'm not, in his mind at least, I'm the sidekick, so we'll just go with that. Because he's definitely got main character syndrome.
You know, a lot of us suffer from that. I too suffer from main character syndrome. So
you kind of have to start a podcast, right?
Yeah, usually the guy who decides to start it has a severe lack of humility to start something like that. I'd imagine, but you get it from doing it. Like the longer you podcast, the more humility you gain from it, because people point out every dumb thing.
Oh, yes, so true. Especially as you get more and more, as you get bigger, it's like no matter what you do, you have a few thousand people upset at you for some reason.
Well, here we go. We're going to get everybody upset. I'm going to quote from a book, and the trivia for today will be this. If anybody can guess the quote year, who said it, and in what location they said it. There's three options here. So if anybody can guess any of the three locations, I'll highlight it on the screen and I'll call you the winner, I guess, for at least one of the three. So here is the quote. Nowadays, the freedom to sin dominates everywhere and to a degree that is not right or normal. And so it is not just a large number of frustrated girls who engage in adultery, having been by the desire of the flesh to harmful lust, but even some married women, and indeed with their husbands still living. This sounds like today, doesn't it?
Yeah,
and we got, as if this were not enough, such women then have their husbands murdered by the adulterer, inspiring the deed through furtive hints. After this, having given such a wicked example to others, they receive their lovers quite openly and sin at will. They repudiate their legal lord in a most horrible fashion and prefer his retainer as if the latter were sweet Abra or mild Jason. Nowadays, because a harsh penalty is not imposed, I fear that many will find this new custom more and more acceptable. And then it goes on to repudiate the priests and tell them to rise up. But no, actually, I will say this one. This is a good one. Oh, you priests of the Lord, forcefully rise up and let nothing stop you. That's the quote. It's a long one, but I love that it starts off that way. Yeah. Anyway. Here we go, Rob. What's your marriage advice for tonight?
What's my marriage advice for tonight?
You got one?
Oh boy, that's a good one. What sub topic within marriage?
Well, I think so. You've got what? 3 kids, 4 on the way, a 4th one on the way?
Yes, sir. Yes. Yep.
What's the last thing you should say to a pregnant wife?
Oh, that's a long list. Asking her why she's craving what she's craving, that's always a lose-lose. Like, because she doesn't know. Yeah, she doesn't know. And so when with our oldest, we were still living down in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. So I could go to a store at any time of the day. So there was a time I had to go to the store and get dill flavored potato chips at about 2 a.m.
Dill flavored potato chips.
Yes. Yep. Nice. And that was only because the stores around us did not have dill flavored ice cream, which she saw on a Facebook reel in the middle of the night and got a craving for. So I'm very glad that now we live in the middle of the nowhere and everything's closed at like 7 p.m. and makes life easy for me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I imagine. Yeah. I would say my advice is don't start your podcast while there are kids awake. That would be my advice.
That's always dangerous.
Yes, it is, because I'm pretty sure there's some anger going on upstairs tonight.
Oh, also, don't tell your wife 15 minutes before you're streaming on a night you normally don't stream that you're suddenly streaming on that night you normally don't stream. I actually did not do that today. I told her hours in advance, but I have done that before.
Oh boy, this sounds gross. What do you think, Rob? Dill flavored ice cream?
I wouldn't eat it. No.
Sounds. I mean, that's almost as bad as some of the flavors I've heard they have in Japan, like fish flavored. And
Ugh.
nope, no, thank you.
Mm-mm.
They got some weird tastes over there.
I mean, I would try it. I
One bite,
at least. It's kind of my policy. I'll try anything once. So yeah,
like podcasting. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that's what happened. I go on a
Try it
podcast
once.
with some crazy Italian guy just to answer some trivia questions, and then it's gonna be 3 years, 3 years tomorrow.
Yeah, I had to think about that. I don't think I've ever invited before Anthony a true Italian onto my podcast. So he broke that habit out of my system. Now I got to invite all the Italians on.
I mean, you don't have to.
That's actually one of the few ancestries I can't claim is Italian. I've got a lot of other things going on, but Italian is not one of them. All right,
Yeah,
so
me either. So,
question for you.
Yes, sir.
You guys have the best governor in the entire United States.
Oh,
so
come on. Don't remind me.
Just kidding. Hey, mine is competing for the bottom. So there's that.
What state do you live in, if you don't mind me asking?
Michigan.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're right down there. You're right down there with
for
us.
The bottom. We were a candidate.
Yeah, at least yours didn't run for vice president.
She was campaigning for it hard.
True.
Okay. She wanted it. I mean, that weird. Look, I've never seen another governor do a Dorito chip communion. So, did you remember that? Right? That was bizarre.
I do.
I ain't forgiving her for that one. Not that I ever voted for her in the first place, but I ain't forgiving her for it. All right. So, first question for you, Rob.
Okay.
What was going through your head when your wife volunteered you for trivia?
I was actually excited because I do like playing trivia. I have just kind of a plethora of stupid random facts in my head about everything, not just the faith. So, I guess while the prideful part of Anthony wants to get out there and become famous, I just like showing off all these random facts that I have. So I was excited just to play trivia, honestly.
Trivia is fun. But it's less fun when somebody memorizes all the answers.
Well, okay, not for the person answering.
I know that was Anthony gave away your secret on that, but you said you were committed. So
okay, so I had no idea that the trivia game I had was the exact one he was using to pull questions from. So I was just doing it as a way to pass time and like just kind of practice, not knowing it would be the exact same set of questions.
That makes sense. I'm just giving you a hard time, but I guess so you had interactions with Anthony. Let's get the timeline down correctly. You had interactions with Anthony, but
yes,
you had never talked to him before in person or over stream or anything like that, correct?
Right. So I'd seen him on Twitter. Let's see. So this was I probably found him on Twitter. It had to be 2020.
2020.
Yeah, and like everyone who's just finding Anthony on Twitter, you don't realize what he's doing and you just hate everything he's doing. And then after a while, I realized there's a little bit of a method to his madness. A little bit. And he's not just, well, he is as brash as he seems, but but it's not all like mean spirited or anything like that. Yeah. And then one of the Catholic podcast and YouTube channels I was watching a lot at the time was Meaning of Catholic, and in the comments, I was watching it all the time. And in the live chat, I would see Anthony in there, and that's kind of that was my like first clue. Like this isn't just some a-hole,
Right.
He's into the same thing, and into the faith just as much as I am. So I kind of got to know him through there, through the Meaning of Catholic, through Twitter.
Did you know the Meaning of Catholic guys, or you just watched them?
Just watch them.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't know them until we started doing the podcast. So,
because I think their actual headquarters or whatever you want to call it, where Tim Flanders is from, is actually not too far from me. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, Grand Rapids.
They just got hit by a nasty storm.
I saw that. That ice storm was nuts.
Yeah. Anyways, keep going on the.
So, like I said, kind of got to know him a little through Twitter, a little through Meaning of Catholic, and then I saw that he was starting his own channel, and I figured, well, I'll watch his stuff. I'll be in his audience just to kind of help support him a little. And there was about 5 of us in those early episodes. It was me, Mrs. C, who I see is in the comments, my wife, and then 1 or 2 other people. And then out of nowhere, so that lasted a few months. And then he decided to come up with the idea for trivia. And my wife volunteered me. And the rest is kind of history.
So I've got at the bottom here, I'm just going to throw this up there. I'm going to put this up a couple times during the podcast, but wait, that's not it. There. That way people will know what the heck we started off with. That is the trivia quote, in case anybody's looking for it. The ... because it's just too long to put it up as a banner, but I'll put that up a couple times. If you can guess the name of the person who said it, the area he's from, or the year he said it. Actually, I think somebody posted this on Twitter in the last 6 to 12 months, so it might be easy to find actually. But anyways, yeah, if you get figured out, I will put your name on the chat on the banner thing, and I'll give you guys a little shout out, whatever. But not that you guys need it, but it is really interesting to think you went from trivia guest volunteered by your wife to co-host producer of Avoiding Babylon in a period of what, 3 months or so?
Yeah, basically. So he invited me on for trivia with to play against Catholic Comedy, who's also on Twitter. So me and Steven from Catholic Comedy were the two contestants, and the game was fun, went well. I kind of liked the feel of, I had a decent setup, camera, microphone, headphones, stuff like that.
For work or for otherwise?
Yeah, kind of for work purposes and kind of gaming at the time and stuff like that. So I'm like, well, yeah, maybe I'll start some sort of podcast, to go through the Baltimore Catechism or something like that. And I told Anthony that. And
wait, did you get this idea before or after Father Mike Schmitz did the Modern Catechism of the Catholic Church?
I think this was before.
A year or so?
Yeah, this was the year he released the first year he did Bible in a year. I think it was that time frame.
Really interesting if you guys would have been releasing those 2 catechisms side by side. I mean, I'm sure he has more bandwidth of whatever you want to call it, but
millions of people more.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, you've got somebody else posting Baltimore Catechism in a year. I bet you'd have found your audience of trads that way. That's for sure.
Probably. So I told Anthony that, and trivia went well. So I actually recorded. I was going to go through the first chapter of the Baltimore Catechism, and I recorded, and it took 2.5 hours. At the end of that 2.5 hours, I realized I was on mute the whole time.
Oh no!
And I'm like, well, this sucks. Maybe I don't want to do this. And then literally that was a Friday night, and I stayed up late because I actually re-recorded to get volume right. And I think that video might still be on Avoiding Babylon it might be, I'm not sure, but that was kind of disheartening. And then the next morning, Saturday morning, 7 a.m. my time, I get a call from Anthony, and he goes, "Man, trivia went really well. I think it's something unique that no one else is doing. Do you want to be a part of it? Do you want to help me host it and run it, and be 50% of the channel?" I'm like, well, that's kind of out of the blue, but sure, let's give it a shot, I guess.
And who was your first guest again? When did you guys start doing guests? Because you didn't have guests right away, I don't believe.
Well, I mean, we did have trivia contestants, and we made good friends with a lot of them that we had on, like Jason and Mark from it's Tex Cathedra
guys or whatever it used to be.
Yep. Yeah,
Tex
it was
a cooler name though.
It is cooler, but I do miss the old trad men. Let me see who our first. So some of the first non-trivia shows were that June. So we started trivia in April. That June was the Dobbs decision. So we out of nowhere decided to hop on and that night and just kind of celebrate and discuss. So that was one of our first non-trivia episodes. And then let's see if my memory serves, then like one of the Mass of the Ages, I think it was like episode 2 came out, so we decided to
cover it.
Yeah, to do like a review of that.
Sure.
Okay, I'm back. Oh, yeah, so yeah, it was the Roe overturned episode. That was that was May 3rd. And then the Mass of the Ages review show. And like we had Father Nix on as a guest for that. He actually streamed from his motorhome out as he was driving, so that was interesting. But then like the first interview we did was Anthony's sister, actually, who was discerning a religious vocation at the time.
Anthony's sister was?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember him ever talking about that. Must have been way early in the podcast then.
Yeah, she was discerning a vocation with the Passionists. So we had her on to discuss that.
Yeah, the first one, I think I told Anthony this, but if you didn't watch that one, I don't know if you did, but the first one I saw of you guys was, I believe it was the Hitchborn interview, the Young Earth creationist stuff.
The first Hitchborn show we did?
With the flood and the giants and everything else.
Almost every time we have Hitchborn on, we talk about that. So when someone says that, it's like,
no, it was the first time that you guys discussed it, actually. But yes, that is a recurring theme with Hitchborn. That is for sure. Because it's such a wide topic. And if you combine that with all the interest in that Ancient Apocalypse show on Netflix, a lot of people are interested in it. As soon as they watch that, they're like, I want to know more, you know? Mm-hmm. So it's like you hit something like that and you're right on top of it.
Yeah, I never would have thought that Hitchborn episode and all the subsequent ones would have gone that direction. You know, because you have Michael who's so
Lepanto.
Yeah, you know, he's all dressed up proper, and he talks about, more or less like this investigative journalism he does, looking into all these scandals of these charities, and then he comes on with us and talks about
he's probably bored of talking. Like, I mean, probably not bored, but he probably gets sick of always being the guy to talk about that stuff.
Yeah, and that's why when we do interviews with some of those bigger names or some of those people who are almost like typecast in a way, we try to talk about other things. Like when we have Dr. Marshall on, we don't like to talk about all the usual like trad stuff. We like to talk about like biblical typology with him, and just because people see that side of him all the time, let's give him something a little different.
I would love to discuss his time as an Anglican priest with a pregnant wife in the Vatican. That would be an interesting discussion.
Ooh, yeah, that would be.
So
it would be very interesting,
because he's done an episode on it before, but it has been so long, and he only briefly talked about it. It wasn't like a long video or anything like that.
Yeah,
but he converted during Benedict. That'd be a super interesting story. The next question I had for you is, I know you're really into like history and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When do you think the West completely converted from, the old school West with monarchy and all that stuff, finally into what it is today, which is probably not as good? But dare I say, when do you think that happened? Do you think it was World War
when
I?
Was the fall more or less of the old
World War II? Was it before those two wars? When do you think that happened?
It's hard at least when it comes to this sort of topic. I wouldn't really separate World War I and World War II.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it definitely started with World War I. You had the tradition. Well, it's hard to call Germany a traditional monarchy, right? Because it really wasn't. It only existed for 40 years.
The Prussian Empire, or are you talking about Germany?
Yeah, right. Yeah, what was called the German Empire really wasn't an empire,
right.
And it really wasn't German. I mean, it was made of German states, but but it was really Prussian in nature. But you had the Habsburgs, obviously, with Austria-Hungary, and then you on the other side you had the Tsar. But besides the Tsar, you had all the new republics. You had Britain, you had France, you had America, you had the Freemasonic kingdom of Italy. So it was kind of almost traditional Europe versus Republican Europe in a sense. And then the result of that was really the overthrow of all the European monarchies. You know, you had the Kaiser was forced to step down, give way to the Weimar Republic. You had the Habsburgs exiled and the Habsburg realm torn apart. You had the Bolsheviks take over in Russia and literally slaughter, the Romanovs. And then World War II was a reaction to that. World War II was people realizing how terrible that was, and they looked to a new system to try to restore that. The new system being National Socialism in Germany and fascism in Italy, things of that nature. But really,
Mussolini and all that,
yeah. Right. But really, that movement was opposed to the new system created by World War One.
Right. Because you get the Weimar Germany, the Weimar Republic, whatever you want to call it, and I don't even know what was going on in Italy during that time, to be honest with you. I do know that at some point there was an agreement where the Pope had a little more power over the Vatican, but
yeah, that was the Lateran Treaty of 1920.
That's right. Yeah, Lateran. That's one I couldn't think of. Mm-hmm. So you think Franz Ferdinand was the domino that dropped it all?
Definitely. I mean, now that was definitely the fuse that ignited it. But I mean, the treaty system that had been created was really what really caused World War One, because the second, Austria gave the ultimatum to Serbia, and the second Russia decided they would stand behind Serbia, I mean, there was no really stopping what was going to happen at that point, because Russia, when they decide to start to mobilize, they're, of all the countries, they are the most, I don't want to say backwards at the time, but they are still organized in the old way prior, in World War One. So when they put out those orders for mobilization, one, it takes them forever, and two, there's no undoing it. Because if they decide to stop and they're wrong, they're screwed. So once they start, they have to keep going. And it takes them. You
can't have a movement like that and just stop it. It doesn't work that way.
Right. So the second Russia starts to mobilize, Germany, whose war plan at this time knows how long Russia takes to mobilize. They know that if they have to fight against Russia, they are likely to fight against France. And they can't fight on both sides. Their only shot is to defeat France so fast that they can defeat France and move all their forces all the way over then against Russia. So the second Russia starts to mobilize, it forces Germany more or less to invade France as quickly as they can.
Because at that time, was Germany looking to France as a potential ally, or were they looking at them as a problem? I don't remember.
As an enemy, definitely. You have the double entente of France and Russia, which had gone back probably, I forget the exact dates, but at least 10, 15 years. And then Britain joined later, much closer to World War One, into what was called the triple entente. So Germany knew that a war with one meant a war with the other, and that meant, like I said, if Russia was mobilizing, they had to defeat France, and they had to defeat France quickly. And unfortunately, to do it quickly, they had to go through Belgium and avoid some of the large forts. And by attacking France through Belgium, that is what brought Britain in, because Britain was kind of on the fence until Germany did that. So it's all these political connections meshed with this very complicated war planning that kind of causes what leads into World War One.
And really, if you ask me, I'd say the Napoleonic Wars were the first world wars, but nobody wants to label those world wars.
They were, in many ways, they really were. I mean, you had theaters of war all across the globe, and that the Napoleonic Wars is what creates the European, the concert of Europe system that lasts from then up almost until World War One. So,
yeah, I've been I'm sure you've read this book. The Count of Monte Cristo led to my interest in Napoleonic Wars.
Okay.
Have you read the
I've actually never read the book, no.
Because a big part of the Count of Monte Cristo, at least the first half, is the exile of Napoleon on the island.
Okay.
And then somebody gets entrenched into that on accident, like an illiterate guy accidentally delivers a letter of Napoleon to the son of somebody else. And that son is like the son of like a magistrate type, somebody who's like an official with the government of France. And clearly the guy has some compassion for Napoleon. So when the son intercepts it, who's looking for political upheaval and rising in the ranks, he's like, oh no, this will ruin my career. So he pins the note on the main character of the Count of Monte Cristo, gets him exiled to prison in, I can't think of what the prison's called. And then has his father literally murdered, has him assassinated so that he can end this whole compassion to Napoleon. And I was like, whoa, I didn't realize. And then he gets out of prison before Napoleon gets his 100 days. So he ends up like taking a new identity and everything. The whole book is like completely the catechist of the what the heck? I'm thinking catechon. That's not the right word.
But the
mechanism that drives it. The mechanism that drives it is Napoleon. That's how he gets in trouble. The catalyst.
Yeah, that's it.
That's the word I couldn't think of. So I was like, anyway. So basically, the idea is that Napoleon's the supporters of Napoleon who are still in the French government, and he accidentally gets involved with it on a merchant ship that stops at the island because everybody got sick on the ship, so they had to pull over until the captain could, right the ship, if you want to say that. And Napoleon ends up giving him a letter and says, deliver this to so and so. And so he does, like a good person, just delivers the letter and then ends up in prison. And it doesn't help that his girlfriend was at the time, fiance, whatever she was, he was going to marry her at some point, happens to be in this conspiracy on accident because another guy who wants to put him in prison likes her. So the son and the fight, the guy who also wants his girlfriend, they establish a little bit of a mutiny or a conspiracy against him, and that's how this all happens. Anyways, it all unwinds into a very interesting revenge story.
Okay. I have to look.
You should read it sometime. I think you'd like it. I'd like to see Crash interview Taylor. That would be interesting, but I don't think he's going to have time for me anytime soon. We'll see.
If anyone could get you an interview with him, it'd probably be Joey.
You think so?
Yeah.
Well, if Joey wants to set that up, I'm happy to bring him on. That'd be fun.
Taylor and Joy, or I think they were Joey's newest child's godparents.
Really?
I'm pretty sure.
Well, let's do it, Joey. So help me out here. I'll do it. I would be happy to interview him. What was I going to say? Okay, so basically your thought process is that World War I, at the very least, led to the fall of the Old West, we'll call it.
Yeah.
Like, essentially, Christendom is over at that point. Now we're into post-Christendom.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, because even the regimes that kind of rise to if not restore old Europe, then at least oppose the new system. Even those regimes are definitely post-Christian. Mussolini, while he wasn't like a total enemy of the church, like many of the Republican sorts of governments were, he definitely also was not like a great Christian leader either. Now there are stories that he repented before his death, and I hope they're true, of course. And you had other regimes that, while they didn't take part in World War II, were still kind of post-Christian in a sense, right? Like Franco in Spain, great leader. I would say his fight against the communists was just for sure, but he still had to resort to certain tactics to win, and ultimately, he did restore the Spanish monarchy, but it was ended up being a very liberal and kind of toothless monarchy, and has since kind of, fallen and failed. So,
what
even
time frame was Franco again?
The Spanish Civil War really started to rage in the 30s.
The 30s.
So you had,
so this is like right after the all this stuff that happened in Mexico then.
Yeah, about a decade later.
Yeah, because Mexico they ran through a communist regime, and is that For Greater Glory movie is great. Mm-hmm. It sounds like there was some similar battles going on over in Italy during that time.
Yeah, in Italy it was the 20s, like Mussolini and the fascists rose to power in the 20s.
Right.
Because really the 20s were a really scary time in Europe, where it really looked like the communists, because the Bolsheviks in Russia were an international communist party. They saw Russia as like the stepping stone to a larger global international communism. So you had, in most European nations in the 20s, the communists were the largest political parties. In Germany, you had literal street battles going on between the communists and other political parties. Same thing in like Italy. In Spain, they have a whole civil war against them. So the 20s was a scary decade in Europe.
Yeah, pretty much the only place that was quote unquote roaring was the North America at that point in time.
Yeah,
and when the worldwide, we'll call it, economy is having such issues as what was going on with the upheaval in Europe and all that, it makes sense that America would eventually feel it with the Depression.
Mm-hmm. Yep. In Germany, I forget exactly when it started. All that stuff I learned a long time ago, but it was at least, I think it was mid-20s. You had the issue start there, and in like the Rhineland and the Ruhr Valley, they were of course paying huge sums of money as reparations to France and Britain. They weren't allowed really to control their industrial heartland and in the Rhineland and Ruhr Valley and stuff. So their economy just collapses, and you see hyperinflation happen to the point where you literally had to take a wheelbarrow full of paper money to go buy a single loaf of bread. Where it was actually cheaper to burn piles of money for fuel than buy fuel with that money.
I've seen that quote somewhere. I'm not sure who said it, but definitely seen that stated.
Yeah.
So, question for you post that, right?
Yep.
What did more damage to the church, do you think? The fall of the monarchical Old West or the Protestant Reformation? Because I think those kind of go hand in hand in different time periods.
That's a tough one. I suppose it depends on how you're going to define church. If you're talking like what did the most damage to like the greatest number of souls, or to like, the body of Christ as a whole, and not necessarily just like the institutional church, then I think an argument could be made for either. It's hard. I mean, and even then, though, the greatest number of souls being lost probably has happened in the last 50 to 60 years, and then during the Protestant Revolution. But you could say the Protestant Revolution in many ways led to where we are now. But I would say in many ways the church responded much better to the Protestant Revolution. You actually had a true Catholic Reformation happening, honestly, 20, 30 years prior to the Protestant Revolution. You had reformers in Spain under like Ferdinand and Isabella in the 1490s, fixing the things that Luther would complain about 30 years later. So not only were we actually already working on these issues prior, but once the Protestant Revolution does happen, you have all these great churchmen step up, right? All these saints, you have you have the Jesuits, start, and they're almost like Catholic shock troopers. They literally the Jesuits almost reconvert all of Europe to Catholicism prior to like the 30 Years' War. They
used to be very, very well liked in the church.
Yeah, until they, I mean, they did such a good job that, like the Templars, they became their own worst enemies. They became so successful that you have these other orders and groups within the church just start to be very bitter towards them and oppose them simply just to oppose them, which ends up leading to their suppression. Which at that point it was an unjust suppression. Whereas nowadays, if they were suppressed, probably deserve it, probably a good thing. But
but they won't be suppressed under the current pope. Just not likely, because he is a Jesuit.
He's a Jesuit.
It's unlikely.
They're supposed to never become bishops or popes.
Is that actually part of the order's requirements? I didn't think it was.
I don't know if it's part of their canons, or it was at least a very closely held tradition for a long time, right?
Gotcha.
That they weren't to seek position within the church. I don't know if it was ever specifically a rule, but yeah, the church responded really well to the Protestant Revolution, actually, with the Council of Trent and through saints like Bellarmine and Cajetan and just all these amazingly brilliant minds who were at the Council of Trent and afterwards. Whereas the church, today, through its current crisis, which really is kind of like a result of the fall of the West, I think we're still trying to figure out how to respond to it. Because I think what we tried at Vatican II and the New Springtime afterward, even if it was done in the best of intentions, and even if you interpret it in the most charitable way possible, it's hard to say that it was successful at this point.
Yeah, especially, considering that Vatican II, no matter what a document says, we learned this under several presidents, no matter what your defining documents say, if your leaders and your culture don't support that document, things are going to go a different direction.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty similar to what ended up going on with Vatican II. Because when you look at the documents of Vatican II, there's nothing extraordinary there as far as changing, other than maybe you could argue the dogmatic constitution was a little different with how they treat other religions, because that was kind of revolutionary. But I don't even know if that's technically, part of Vatican II, or if that's a separate piece.
Nostra Aetate and Lumen Gentium, the two kind of documents that touch on that the most. They're definitely Vatican II documents, for sure. Probably the two most authoritative documents, actually. But yeah, I would say if there was any real change at Vatican II, drastic change, it was in that area more than others.
Yeah.
But
with the ecumenism with religions that aren't even Christian, technically.
Yep.
Which, by the way, speaking of talking about Christianity, when you guys were interviewing Sam Shamoon, I was blown away by the whole Word of God thing with Jeremiah and all that. I was like, whoa. I had to go back and look at some of those verses in the Old Testament to see if I could figure out exactly what he was talking about. That was pretty cool.
And even if whether you take his position that it is like a pre-incarnate Christ, or you take the more like Thomas scholastic position that it's some created effect, or whatever
kind of thing,
right? The theophany, created effect, however you want to say it. Regardless of that position, like prior to hearing that from Sam, or just having those passages pointed out, I wouldn't have pointed those out as like examples of the Trinity in the Old Testament. I wouldn't have thought to do that. So I think overall, just Sam pointing these areas out as a way to show the Trinity in the Old Testament is great. And I don't think you necessarily have to get into the minutia of how God accomplished it, and but
no, I don't think you necessarily have to. Really, I guess where I stand on everything is like, if anybody comes at me and says God didn't create the world and everything in it, I'm immediately discarding their opinion. So I don't need to hear what they have to say after that, because it's like, who cares? You're just coming at it. Your foundation is totally different from mine. So I can't even take what you're saying with a grain of salt. I can't even take what you're saying at all, because I don't trust it. Like atheists, I don't trust atheists.
No, you can't, because at like a presuppositional level, the worldview is so different that like, yeah, that how can you trust them when they can't tell you why it would be wrong to lie, or to make up a falsehood
what's
or
their
something
moral
like that.
authority? There's no more authority to turn to. Like, they're like, oh, my authority is the Christian morality of civilization. It's like, so you're admitting that Christianity is your foundation, you just reject it. That's what they're doing, right? Because if you claim that Christian morality is good, then your foundation is Christianity, whether you admit it or not.
Yep.
So here's a question for you. Anthony, I started getting into this, but I don't think he was necessarily ready for it. I think you might be, though.
Okay.
Where do you land on the use of Masoretic texts for a Bible translation?
I think it depends what you're using it for, right? I think for liturgy, especially, we shouldn't use Masoretic. We shouldn't use translations taken from the Masoretic manuscripts, just because liturgically speaking, like that was just never done until like Vatican II.
Because Jerome's texts predate the Masoretic by like 500 plus years.
Yeah, the Masoretic texts really weren't finished until
almost 900, or allegedly could be as far as 1200, somewhere in that time frame.
Yeah, it starts maybe in the 700s and goes possibly up to 1200. So yeah, they're just so much older, and while they do originate from like these proto Masoretic manuscripts that do that are about the same age as like the Septuagint, if not maybe a little bit older, possibly. The Masoretic manuscripts that are used for translation, like this is the scripture of the Pharisees. It was developed by the Pharisees after the failed Jewish revolts, and when they're exiled again to Babylon.
Which revolt? That's the real question. Because there's a lot of Jewish revolts over
right. I mean, you had the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and then you have the Bar Kokhba revolt in like 120 or something, where Jerusalem is like literally leveled completely to the ground, and that's when like you have all the Pharisees, you have the Jewish diaspora in general, but like the Pharisees.
Who escaped the temple destruction in 70 AD? It wasn't mostly the Pharisees or the Zealots that escaped. It was the rich,
the Sanhedrin, or the
Sadducees. Yeah, yep. It was your Hellenistic Jews that escaped the temple destruction, and then some Pharisees and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But like Josephus, being a Pharisee who wrote about it after the fact, like he's kind of unique in that aspect, because he even talks about it as if this is like of biblical proportions that the temple falls, and it's like, how can you write that and discard
the prophecy made 40 years before?
Yeah. How can you do that? I don't understand.
Well, that's why it's hard.
I should have read that quote to start this podcast. Nobody would have got that.
That's why it's hard to really support the Masoretic text, right? Because you have this group that is diametrically opposed to Christ and his church, so much so that where they completely ignore a prophecy made 40 years before the destruction of the temple, and they do so purposefully. So it's hard to then take the scriptures they develop in opposition to the church and say we should use these within the church. Now, if you want to, for scholars to use them for like deep Bible study and textual analysis, I don't have a problem with that, as long as they do so under the guidance of the church.
Mm-hmm.
But for something like liturgy or devotion or something like that, I think we need to take things from the Vulgate or from the Septuagint.
Yeah, because I mean, the Septuagint would have been what the Greeks that Jesus was preaching to and the Jews would have been using.
Yes, I think in the New Testament authors quote the Septuagint over 300 times compared to like 40 times for the Masoretic.
And I would imagine in the cases where they're quoting the Masoretic, it would match the Septuagint as well.
Yeah, and it's more or less maybe just different idioms or ways of phrasing that they're taking from the Masoretic as opposed to the Septuagint.
So then that leads me to the big question here: is it he shall crush thy head or she shall crush thy head?
Yeah, I am by no means a Hebrew expert, and I've seen it said both ways. And I think it can be both ways and still mean the same thing. But overall,
Well,
I think
yes,
there
I would
is
agree with
more
that.
evidence for she, personally.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of a breakdown. I was going to give it to Enoch last week, and then I kind of held off. And I was going to do a whole episode on this, but we'll just keep it simple, and I'll kind of explain it a little better. So there's a philosopher, Jewish philosopher, Philo. You ever heard of him?
Yes.
So Philo actually does an entire like breakdown of Genesis, just flat out at around the same time, contemporary with Jesus.
Okay.
And he talks about each line, like he does like paragraph after paragraph on each individual line of Genesis.
Wow.
Just literally. And he talks about how it's clear that when they're talking in Genesis 3:15, they're talking about the woman. It has to be. And he also states that the leading belief of at least Jewish philosophy at the time is that the intelligence, or like the brain, is a male thing, and the emotion, or like the feeling, is a female thing. So when you get into this ambiguous,
I have no comment on that.
None. But when you get into this androgynous pronoun, if you're describing female intelligence and you don't want to describe the intelligence as male, you would use an androgynous pronoun that could mean either.
Okay.
So the intelligence of the woman is what crushes the snake's head. So the decision.
Whereas if they had meant male, they would have used a.
Why wouldn't they just say he?
Right.
So if the leading philosopher of one of the leading philosophers, I mean, he actually went to the Roman emperor and defended Judaism against the Romans just basically killing all the Jews after the temple fell. I believe that's the timeline. And him and Josephus both had to defend this. And so when he writes this entire analysis of Genesis, it's like this guy was well respected because he was keeping the danger away from the various diaspora of the Jews. You know what I mean? Or diaspora, whatever the right pronunciation of the word is. Anyway, so if you were going to say it's a man, you would just say a male pronoun. Just flat out. You would just do that.
Makes sense.
And the same type of Hebrew scholars were consulted when Jerome puts together the original Vulgate. So I don't believe copyist error. Why would you? Why would anyone accept that?
In with the Vulgate with Jerome, it should be noted that like Jerome, he didn't use the actual Septuagint for the translation of the Old Testament. He used the Septuagint for like the numbering of the Psalms and
where available he had Hebrew scriptures wherever.
Right. Available. Anytime he went to the Hebrew manuscripts. So it's not like him saying she shall crush the head is just a copy and paste from the Septuagint, because it's not. He went and learned the Hebrew language so he could translate from the Hebrew manuscripts,
which would make him somewhat of an expert on Hebrew language,
especially when you're like 1,600 years closer to the source than we are now. Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't understand. So like, I know actually, it was funny. Somebody said the reason we know it's he is because of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I was like, really? Are you sure about that? So I went and dug into it, and no fragment of the Dead Sea Scrolls does it contain a pronoun associated with who's crushing the head. None.
It's almost like people just make stuff up.
I know. I'm like, well, you gave me your evidence, and I went and checked, and it's not there. That's a source. I'm gonna check the source. That's just how I am.
That's one of the reasons why I think we're seeing, at the very least, like online Protestantism, kind of like just failing miserably and collapsing lately. It's because like, I mean, it started with like Google and search engines. You could search these claims that were being made against the church, and you might have to click on a few different web pages to get an idea. But like now with as much as I'm against AI in certain cases, like being able to type some of these things into an AI like Grok or Chat GPT and just having it go through 30 web pages and spit out and just say like unequivocally, like, no, this was literally just made up. It's like all these lies that have just been told, they don't work anymore.
I believe so. I just want to correct this. A lot of misconception around the word "it shall crush." It is not the correct translation as far as I understand it. The correct translation would be "you shall crush thy head." If you were to just do a straight Hebrew to English, but if you're looking contextually, it has to be the woman. And that's what Philo says. He actually calls it a barbarism. That
barbarism,
like a barbarism of the language. Like, how could you say he there? He called it like he's like, I've got the book in my other room. I can go get it later if we want to get into that. But he literally calls it a barbarism of language to call it to, if you were to say like he instead of she, which is kind of funny.
Okay.
But long story short, everything he points to leads me to believe flat out it has to be she, and he points that way. And I think if I remember correctly, the original text of Josephus even says it that way. I'd have to go back and find it, but I'm 90% sure he says it. And I do know, because I just brushed up on it again, there's a video by a really good channel, which I'm not sure if you've ever watched it, but it is called I Miss Christendom.
Okay. I haven't heard of it.
He did an entire video on She Shall Crush Thy Head, and it's very good.
I'll have to look into that, because it's an area where I've heard both claims, obviously, but the side that claims she, it, is like the traditional side I'm more just in tune with. So I've never felt the need to look into it, because like, okay, that makes sense.
I only actually started looking into it because my father-in-law feels very strongly about it. So him and I have talked about it quite a bit. And he's got a very strong Catholic faith too. So that's
okay. So he is a Catholic.
Yes. Oh yeah. Very much
okay.
so.
And does he agree with you?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Him and I are on the same page, sometimes for different reasons, but we're on the same page for most of the things we talk about. So
nice.
I really appreciate and respect him. And if he ever listens to this podcast, shout out to you. You're really awesome.
My family members aren't allowed to listen to my podcast.
I have a great relationship with my father-in-law. He's really good person, especially in the Catholic faith. He's really good with that stuff. So anyway, the other one that always gets me, and I always look for this, is Isaiah when he talks about the virgin shall, and in some cases they'll say like a young maiden,
maid.
Yeah. I think that's Knox. Knox was the first one that did the young maid, unless it was in the King James and I just didn't know it.
I think it was in the King James. Give me just a minute here. I'm going to pull up actually a book on the subject by Tim Flanders from Meaning a Catholic. So he has a book called Introduction to the Holy Bible for Traditional Catholics. And lo and behold, it pulls up right to the page I need, because that's the page I use it for most. So he actually, let's see here. Oh, do you mind if I share my screen, actually?
Go ahead. Absolutely.
Hopefully, I don't think Tim would mind me sharing his book verbatim here.
Did somebody ask if the chats are combined? They are, in fact, combined. I see all of Rob's chats.
They're combined for what you and I can see, but I think they are in their own separate chats.
Oh, yeah. So I can pull them up here, but anybody who's pulling them up from the other side, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, so the chats are not combined. So if you're in Rob's chat, you're not seeing anybody in my chat. But to be fair, I haven't seen anybody in my chat in a while. So they're probably mostly in Rob's chat.
So notice the little this, no one will see this but you and I, but notice like the little
hyperlink
symbol.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's for everyone from my side.
Yeah. Hey, we're at 69 subscribers on Crash Canon. So if you happen to like this podcast, please subscribe.
Yeah, if you're seeing this on Avoiding Babylon, that's only because Chris allowed me to stream it over there. This is actually being done on his channel on Crash Canon. So go over to his page and subscribe.
I'll drop a link. What does the link work in? I'll drop it on your side if I can do it.
Put it in the private chat, and
okay,
and I can drop it on my side if you can't.
Actually, you guys made me a moderator. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I did.
I think, yeah, I might be able to drop it myself. We'll see. If not, then I'll just put it in the private chat. Oh, good. You even put the thumbnail up with Joe Rogan being astonished at your brilliance.
I had no idea why you had him in it, but I'm like, I'll go with it.
Because it makes the thumbnail. It really does, doesn't it?
Yeah, thumbnails are one of those things. I have a fun time making them, but people
that's
can.
not what I wanted. Keep going. I'm sorry. I dropped the live stream in there. I don't want them to leave your live stream.
But people have a hard time like even understanding what you're saying when you're even just speaking clearly. So when you put up a thumbnail to try to either drive home a point or something, there's so much room for interpretation that they almost always take it the wrong way. Like today I posted a clip from our members only show last week where we're discussing like just how like social media personalities can clash, right? It's even in the Catholic sphere. And it's just kind of a general conversation about that and some different examples that we've noticed on, just publicly. So I label it like Catholic social media personalities clash, and I put 6 images of 6 different Catholic media guys on the thumbnail and just put
I saw verse
that in between them. And I'm thinking, well, people will see the title and they'll see the thumbnail and they'll listen to the discussion and they'll we're obviously just talking in generalities about how personalities can clash due to like temperaments and things like that. And no, everyone thought I was attacking Father Mike Schmitz personally.
If you put him on a thumbnail and it's not like a happy-go-lucky thumbnail, everybody just assumes you're attacking Father Mike Schmitz.
It's like, guys, these are just the 6 most recent photos I've used in other thumbnails. Come on.
I think even I asked you when you guys were like the missed shot he had on Fox News or whatever that Anthony had you put together.
Yes.
How many of the okay, wait, let me ask you this question since we're here right now about this exact discussion.
Yeah.
The thumbnails that are created, does Anthony feed you what he wants or do you come up with them on your own?
So usually the morning of a broadcast, I'll message him when I wake up because he's an hour ahead of me and works construction. So he's always awake whenever I wake up. So I text him when I wake up and I'm like, what are your thoughts on tonight? Because he'll usually have an idea of like at least the main topic we want to talk about, due to whatever he's seen in the media or whatever's going on. And then based on that main topic that he thinks he wants to talk about, I'll be like, okay, well, what kind of like, how do we want to word that in a title? And we'll come up with a good title together. And then from there, with kind of the subject in mind and with the title in mind, I'll come up with the thumbnail and like shoot it over to him and see what he thinks. And, sometimes he'll be like, oh, let's use this word on the thumbnail instead of this word or something like that. And then once we're both happy with it, with the thumbnail and the title, then I'll create the actual stream that uses both.
Yeah, see, when it came to thumbnails on my old show, it was a one-man thing. I did all the thumbnails and my co-host had no say in it whatsoever.
Okay. I like him coming up with the general idea.
No, that would have been nice. I never had that.
Yeah, I do like it. There are times where I will like come up with it and we'll agree on it and we'll put it out. And then like 20 minutes before the show starts, he's like, no, I think we should change it or do it this way. I'm like, 1, we have 20 minutes and 2, like, come on. And
this tends to happen with you guys. And then the video has nothing to do with the thumbnail.
Well, and that's the thing. Like he'll find a topic that is better, but it will be like 20 minutes before. And he'll ask me, can you get a new title and thumbnail up? And it's like, no, I'm like driving home from work, So
you're like, I could change the title when I stop, but I can't change the thumbnail.
Right. The thumbnail took me half an hour. It's not going to happen.
People don't know this. Thumbnails take a long time.
It does. It's
not quick.
I take every shortcut I can. I do. I try to use the same images that I've used in the past, same just general layout. I try because I don't have all this time because I'm doing it on like my break at work or in the morning before I go to work, things like that. If I was doing this 8 hours a day, that'd be really cool because I could actually make like really creative thumbnails every time. But
the thumbnail game is like so crucial to YouTube.
It is.
Because like if the thumbnail doesn't pop, nobody's gonna click on it. It's just unless they know your channel and they read titles, but that is a small portion of your audience.
Exactly. Because so the title, like you said, the title's good for those who are searching for your channel. And the title will be what catches their eye on whatever subject they want to hear. But for anyone who's not like specifically looking through your channel, the title is just whatever they search for on YouTube, the title is going to be what allows that video to appear in the results. But when they're looking through the results, they're not looking at the titles. It's going to be their thumbnail, your thumbnail that catches their eye. So yeah, today I used 6 images of different Catholic media guys and put verse in between them, because that's going to catch someone's eye enough to where they'll then read the title, realize it is something they want to listen to, and click on,
Yeah, I mean, it really is just one of the key aspects to getting your channel looked at. And you also want to have some kind of branding that's not like so ridiculous that it shows up. Branding can be good and bad. If you have bad branding, it's going to hurt your thumbnails. If you have good branding, it can help people to find similar things and queue them up for later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because eventually they'll just get a feeling for what your thumbnails are, and then they can literally pick your videos out of a list just by glancing at the thumbnails.
Absolutely. And shout out to somebody like Joe Heschmeyer's thumbnails. Those are always popping. Mm-hmm. He's got some good ones. Have you seen the latest ones he's had? They're really good.
Yeah, they are good. It's one of, you could, like, your thumbnails are good, and like Tim Gordon actually makes really good thumbnails too. And it's like, I know, like, it takes me 30 to 45 minutes to make a thumbnail. Looking at his, it's like that took hours. It's like, oh, I wish I had hours to do that.
What program do you use?
I just use like Adobe Express, which is just one of their free offerings. I have subscriptions to all the more complicated stuff, but like for what I'm doing in a thumbnail, Express, it offers everything I need to do it quickly. So my
thumbnails are made in Paint 3D.
Okay. Yeah. See, you don't need something complicated. Not for basic ones anyways.
I do. In fact, for the first 2 years I was podcasting, all my thumbnails were done in old school Paint.
Really?
Yes.
Nice.
And then at some point, somebody was like, "Have you tried out Paint 3D?" And I was like, "No, what's that?" And I typed it in. I was like, "Whoa, this is cool."
See, I like Adobe Express because it does interface with like all their other programs. So whatever I've made in like in other Adobe products, I can easily pull into there. Or like if I want a stock image from like Adobe stock, it pulls in very quickly and easy through there.
So if somebody like put you in a room and said, "All right, you have to compliment Anthony," what would be your biggest compliment? Both if somebody said this is for the survival of your family, and if they didn't say this is for the survival, what would be your compliment?
He is the most honest and genuine person I've ever met. You always know what you're getting with Anthony. You always know where you stand. And like, he wears his heart on his sleeve. And yeah, sometimes that's not always the best thing, right? But he's just such a genuine guy. And when he says that he's got your back, or when he says anything, you can trust him. Like, he really truly means it. And I just know that like when I decided to ask him to be my newest son's godfather this upcoming summer, like, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, if something happens to me and or my wife, like, Anthony will make sure like my son is raised Catholic no matter what. And like, it will be, he will take it deadly seriously. And he, like I said, he's just the most genuine guy I've ever met.
Yeah. The godparent thing, that it's funny that you bring that up, because and I appreciate you saying that about him, because he seems very cool from the few times I've talked to him. But as do you. Obviously, you're here talking to me, so you're a pretty cool guy. But people don't take the godparent thing seriously. Like, my wife and I have had to scrounge for people that actually take the faith seriously to get, and we've had 5 kids, so it's like godparents 5 times now. It's like, my goodness. Mm-hmm. And we ran out of like siblings that practice the faith. And
it's when we had our first, when he was born, I had just been kind of back in the church for a few months at that point. My wife was in the middle of RCIA, And my
What
wife
was
was
she before?
She kind of non-denominational Baptist sort of thing.
That was a big change.
It was a very big change. She was actually confirmed and brought into the church about a month after our first son's baptism. But so when we had our first son, we kind of allowed ourselves to be pressured into like having my brother be the godfather. And like, I love my brother. He's a good guy, but he doesn't practice the faith, and like, I don't want to say that I regret that choice, because I hope I can get him back to the church to where he would then really be like a faithful godfather. But in a way, I do regret that choice now, at least at this point. So it is definitely something that
it's not that you think your brother was a flat out bad choice. It's that you think that there were other faithful people that could have been chosen. Is that what you're saying?
Well, and the thing is, at that point, like, almost not really.
Oh, really?
Because
Okay.
we didn't know too many other like faithful Catholics at that time. They were there. I don't know.
So really, it sounds like in that scenario, he was a good choice.
He wasn't the worst. You know what
Right.
I mean? And like I said, maybe my first son, my oldest, who is his godson, maybe he can be what brings my brother back to the church at some point, something like that. But I just wish we had just taken it a little bit more seriously and at least had that perspective more. At least
how long ago was this?
So our oldest is 6. So it was
6. Okay.
He was born 2019. So this was the spring, basically a year before COVID.
So you started coming back into your faith around 2018, 2019 timeframe?
End of 2018. Yeah.
End of 2018?
Yeah. Once we, when we realized that my wife was pregnant and that we were going to have a kid, it's what finally like forced me to kick off kind of my spiritual laziness that I'd been in for a decade at that point.
So, but you still got, if I remember correctly, you got married in the faith though, correct? Oh, you did not. Oh, you got it blessed later on, I assume?
Got it. Yeah. What we forced the RCIA program my wife was into to convalidate the marriage because they weren't going to.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
Yeah. It was like, the week before the like rite of election, right? Which is a few weeks before the whole, the actual confirmation and stuff, in the middle of RCIA class, they're telling us what it's all going to look like, how it's all going to go, like the nuts and bolts of the liturgy. And at some point I'm like, so at what point do you convalidate the marriages? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, no.
Was this a very Novus Ordo RCIA?
This parish had liturgical dancers.
All right.
Yep. The Stations of the Cross they did were scriptural Stations of the Cross, which do not match the traditional Stations of the Cross.
Notice the face I make when you say that. I'm like, oh, I know.
No. Right.
That's not good.
It was the most modernist. That's funny.
I have to say something about that. I'm sorry. Let me interrupt you real quick. I had a guy at a bowling alley in the area I have lived in my entire life come up to me, ask if he could take his picture with me. And I was like, why? And he's like, well, obviously, Seth, everybody wants to take a picture with you. And I was like, my name's not Seth. Well, I didn't actually say that. I was like, you know what? Fine. Just let him take the picture. And I found out later on, he posted that selfie on Twitter. And I found it years ago, but his account's since been deleted. It said, my selfie with Seth Rogen. And if I remember correctly, Seth Rogen said, that's not me.
Really?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. It's just like, what? It's like the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And, I didn't even look. I kind of a little bit. And I had hair on my head at the time. So there's that. But
I was going to say, kind of the way you're dressed now kind of gives that vibe. in a
to a
sense.
degree.
Yeah, a little
This
bit.
is my disguise for podcasting, so nobody recognizes me in the real world.
Oh man, I should do that.
It works. I mean,
I say so
I've
much
had
stuff that could get
people
me in trouble.
that thought when I said I podcasted that the podcast wasn't mine. They're like, "Well, where are you?" And I was like, "Really? You don't like, okay."
You pull off your glasses and they're like, "Oh, it is you." And it's like, "Yes, I'm Clark Kent."
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, yeah. So like, it does work. Tim Pool said that, and I took it for. I was like, "Sure, let's try it." And literally, it does work.
I should wear a cowboy hat and sunglasses on the podcast from now on.
Put a sombrero on.
Yeah. Yeah.
With the little tassels hanging down all the way around it.
Yeah.
It's just like, gosh. But yeah, that literally, I have been mistaken in public as like literally Seth Rogen, not like a lookalike. Like they thought I was him.
Oh man.
And you know, if I have enough drinks in my system, my laugh starts to sound like his a little bit. So that might have been part of it. But all right, you were saying something. You pulled this up, and then I rudely interrupted.
No, it's okay. So you were talking about with like the Virgin versus Young Maid. So can I make this bigger for people? What did I do? Okay,
that's a Michael Scott
bit.
joke if I've ever heard one.
So this compares the translation of different verses between versions. So you have
yes, I've seen
the traditional
before.
Dewey Reams on the left. I wouldn't worry about the New Vulgate. You have the King James kind of in the middle, the Knox next to it. And then you have the Catholic Masoretic on the right, the RSV, and then the New American Bible. So if we're talking about Isaiah, chapter 7, verse 14, you have basically virgin, 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 and it doesn't get changed to, so maid, it gets changed to maid and Knox.
I have the Knox Bible, and he has a note in the bottom that says, clearly the maid would be a virgin.
Well, yeah, so Knox is doing this in like not Elizabethan, but in like Victorian English, right?
Yeah.
And maid in Victorian English meant virgin. Yep. Like it, so it still is, even at that point, meant virgin. The RSV, I guess the first edition was young woman, but in the second edition in 2006 they corrected it. But like the New American Bible says young woman.
That like the New American Bible, the New American Bible is my least favorite Bible to read.
It is
flat out.
Yeah, it is the most Protestant so-called Catholic Bible there is.
Actually, what's even funnier is the Nova Vulgata, the New Vulgate.
Yeah,
actually goes back to a lot of the old stuff and like puts it back to the way it was. Do you know why the New Vulgate was necessary?
Mm-mm.
Have you heard of the Pius XII Psalter?
Yes.
That was pretty much why it was necessary to fix the Vulgate.
Okay.
It was optional, but then it became enforced in print. Like all the publishers, like, well, we got this new Psalter, so we'll make more money by printing a new Vulgate with the new Psalter in it. And in order to convince publishers to move back to the Vulgate as it was, and then also make some minor corrections here and there, because there are some corrections that, good or bad, they're there. They actually went back to almost identical to the Gallican Psalter in the Nova Vulgata. When you look at the Nova Vulgata, it's better than most of your 1960s printed breviaries that had the Pian Psalter and the 1950s Bibles that had the Pian Psalter. It's just not. It's a bad chanting version of the Psalms. So they're like, well, nobody likes this.
Makes sense.
So yeah, when they printed the Nova Vulgata, they're like, well, we want it to be chanted. We want to be able to do that again. And so they put it back basically to the Gallican Psalter. It's almost identical. There's a few words that changed, but not enough that they can't chant it anymore.
Okay.
I have friends that are really into music ministry and like director, like they know what they're talking about. And I asked him, like, was this basically a restoration of the Gallican Psalter? And he's like, yeah, it basically does. So like, as much as people hate new things, the Nova Vulgata, the New Vulgate, is not bad.
I was gonna say it shows here that most of it does match like the Dewey Reams.
It does. It absolutely does. And if you know a little bit of Latin, you can tell which things are right and which things are wrong.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting about the Vulgate. So have you ever heard of a website called churchlatin.com?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't explored it much.
He reprinted the 1899 Vulgate. I'm very interested to compare it with the Nova Vulgata and see how many things I can find that are different. He's like a one-man show. He does really good stuff on his Church Latin. If you're ever interested, just shout out to him. If you're ever interested in like old Latin textbooks or like how to pray some of the older breviaries out there, his stuff has some great resources and it's not expensive. The Vulgate gets up there when you buy the leather-bound version.
Yeah.
The paperback's like, I think $30 or $40. The hardback is like $60. And then the full leather-bound is $100. But
churchlatin.com, you said?
Churchlatin.com. I can pull it up real quick if you guys want to see it.
Yeah, I've never looked at his stuff.
He's got a great, like he's not charging a lot of money. So he's not making a lot of money doing it. He just really likes it. Do it, like providing that resource for people. And he spent years fixing the facsimile that was out there. Or I take it back. He had it scanned himself and then he fixed it. It's already up. There we go. That's it. And it's in stock right now. If you want an old Vulgate, that's where to go. Let me grab it right now. I grabbed one. I've got one at my house right now. I've been digging through it just to see. All right, let me pull this up. Select window or screen. There it is. Allow. There it is. All right. This is the Church Latin website. Is it going to let me? I got to pull yours off. Hold on. There we go. This is it. So it looks really nice. It actually matches pretty closely with the quality of like what Baronius puts out.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really, and it's got the extra stuff. So like it's got the Prayer Manasseh, the 3rd and 4th Ezra, and the Bell and the Dragon and Daniel, which is in I think the Baronius Diaremes has that in there too. But most of the Orthodox extra books are in there. Like if you go to an Orthodox study Bible, they have the Prayer Manasseh, they got 3-4 Ezra. They got Psalm 151, which I always joke around. It's the Cardi 151 Psalm. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff. So, but yeah, I agree with you. It is funny to look back at these translations and you know which ones came from the Masoretics because most of the Protestant translations came from the Masoretics.
Yeah, and it's just ridiculous that like the Bible that that is approved for liturgical use in the U.S. copies the Protestant Bibles in almost every way. You know, like Luke 1:28, full of grace.
Yeah,
is well, except King James or the New American Bible, where both highly favored or favored one. And then instead of like Acts, where decrees are decreed, no, decisions were reached.
The best one is on a church nearby me. They actually had the King James version where it's like and goodwill towards men instead of and what is it supposed to be? It's men of goodwill, but it was goodwill towards men, which is the way the King James writes it. They took care of it when they got a new paint job up, but everybody that knew that quote knew it was the King James quote, not the correct Catholic quote. Oh man.
I also like the New American Bible, John 1:4. In every other translation, it's light of men, except in the New American, where it's light of the human race.
because of course, men or man doesn't mean mankind, obviously.
Right.
It's like Trudeau coming at me like people kind, and it's like, do you have any idea how stupid you sound? I probably just lost my entire Canadian audience, but that's okay. Got banned by Canadian YouTube. Anyway, actually, no, it's Carney now. They got a Carney in charge.
Yes, they do, don't they?
Oh, man. All right, let's see here. There was something else I was going to ask you. Oh, yeah. So back to before I interrupted you like 3 times to switch subjects. I have ADHD hardcore apparently. What do you think works the best about you and Anthony with Avoiding Babylon?
I think we are very different, but in a very complementary way. We are almost the exact opposite. We are the exact opposite temperamentally. He's a sanguine choleric, and I'm a phlegmatic melancholic. So we are literally like the exact opposites.
Where do you take the test to find that out?
Temperamentquiz.com, I think is what it is.
Bonus show after. I'm going to take the quiz. No, I'm just kidding.
No, you really you should. It's so temperamentquiz.com was written by oh, come on, I should know this. We interviewed them. I want to say it's Lorraine Art and Lorraine Bennett. They are 2 Catholic authors that have done a lot of study into temperaments. And they do a great job showing like the history of temperaments, how like the ancient Greeks kind of discussed and studied them a lot. And then you have, the Catholic scholastics doing the same. So it's a very traditionally like Catholic sort of way of looking at, I don't want to say necessarily psychology, but, at least a Catholic way of looking at personalities and things like that. So I think Anthony and I work well because we complement each other, where he's the brash, outgoing one that will pester someone to come on our show until they do. And I'm the one who's then, like apologetic towards that person. Like, I'm so sorry Anthony's bothered you for the last 6 months.
It's your pinned Twitter comment. I'm apologizing for Anthony or something like that, whatever it is.
But at the same time, he's pushed me a lot, to grow in that sort of area where now I feel a lot more comfortable talking on camera. Whereas beforehand, I never would have ever thought I'd be, comfortable with it. So we both push each other, and we both have never had an issue calling each other out, when we feel like we need to, whether it's for things that we've tweeted. And I don't want it to make it seem like Anthony's the only one who gets called out when he tweets, because we both do that with each other. So
you had that backlash for your Carlo Acutis tweet.
Yeah. So you want to know what the subject is for?
Right.
You want to know what the subject is for tomorrow's show? It's that article in the Economist about Carlo Acutis.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Wait, is it the one where I thought somebody posted a link and said maybe we should think harder before we canonize people? Is that what it was?
That was I forget his name. He's actually a priest here in Minnesota, but he's, I think, Backwards Feet on Twitter is his handle.
That's an interesting handle.
It is. But yeah, he's a priest here in Minnesota. That I usually disagree with on most things, but I do agree with him on this issue. But yeah, he tweeted that article, and the article, spoiler alert, more or less goes over how like this journalist was looking into Carlo Acutis, right? Because it's like kind of the big name in the church today, and he wanted to look into him, and what he found interesting is the more he looked, like the less he found. But he ended up finding like Carlo's best friends from school, and they had no idea the kid was religious.
Really?
That's what this journalist is. Yeah. But
that doesn't necessarily mean that he wasn't, because there's a lot of very quiet Catholics out there.
Yeah. I don't know very many publicly quiet saints, but
True.
Anyways, that's what this journalist was saying. But the journalist, like the one person like really pushing for the canonization and like is Carlo's mother. Mm-hmm. Anyways, it's an interesting article that we're going to discuss. But I did get a text message
for tomorrow
from Anthony today saying, "Rob, you might have been right about the thing the whole time."
I definitely think the waiting period for canonization, unless it's like obvious to everyone. Like I think St. Francis of Assisi was like 2 years after he died, he was already canonized.
Yeah, Pius X was quick.
Yeah. Unless it's like very clear.
Yeah, it's got to be like martyrs, like, and
Yeah,
I mean like legitimate martyrs. I think we use that term way too widely these days, but like a legitimate martyrdom, I think, is one that the waiting period can be waived or should be waived for. But other than that, I think it's just prudential to wait. Like if they're in heaven, what's the rush, right?
But like everybody's concerned about Sheen's canonization taking so long, and I'm like, this isn't that long. I mean, Joan of Arc waited what, 500 years after she was like killed by bad clergy,
Yeah,
to be canonized. I mean, I think that was actually during some of that upheaval we were talking about earlier, is when she got canonized, like the 20s.
Yeah, I mean, it was a long time. Yeah.
So I don't think there's anything wrong with having some kind of waiting period, unless like we said, unless it's completely obvious.
I think it in relation to Sheen, it's one of those things where the issue isn't so much like it taking a long time for him. It's like, if it's taking that long for him, why have others been canonized so quickly? Like Carlo, for instance. Like, are we really saying like Carlo's holiness is so much more apparent than Fulton Sheen's? Like, has Carlo's impact on Catholicism been that much greater and more obvious than Fulton Sheen's? And I'm not saying there aren't necessarily issues with Fulton Sheen, because I think some of his stances about certain things towards the end of his life are suspect. I think most likely he was just an old man becoming senile.
Sheen?
Yeah. Like
have
have
you seen the last interview he did? I mean, he was still like, he was with it, the last one he did on TV.
Yeah, I just think some of his positions regarding Vatican II, and the liturgy and stuff at the end, like,
he certainly wasn't a Lefebvre, let's put it that way.
Yeah. And not that everyone has to be. I'm not saying he should not be canonized because of.
He also wasn't a Panini or a Bunini.
You can tell you're on Twitter.
Yeah.
Archbishop Panini.
Annabelle Panini. That's my favorite Twitter handle ever. So shout out to whoever came up with that idea. That's a hilarious Twitter handle, Panini. Bunini. I think I pronounced it right this time.
You did. No,
I
so
mean, there's that. But
I'm not saying like his canonization should be stopped for that at all. I'm saying, I don't, why rush Carlos in delay Sheens other than political reasons, which is what it really seems like.
I'm happy to answer this first, and then Rob can totally crap over whatever I say. I actually think it entirely depends on who's at the head of the church, because you have traditional priests who are not TLM priests who are locked in because of Traditionis Custodes. Like, I know plenty of young priests, especially in the area I live in, who are locked into doing Novus Ordo, but would happily do the TLM if they were allowed.
Yeah.
And with them at the helm, I have no issues with what they're doing with RCIA, provided that they selected the person doing the RCIA. So that's another factor. You could have a TLM parish where they have a Novus Ordo mass, and then you have, like, Betsy in her 70s doing RCIA, who was there before the parish went back to doing the TLM. So it's all over the place. I wouldn't necessarily say that one is better than the other, but you're probably more likely to find a good RCIA instructor in a TLM or in a more traditional parish.
I would say, it's going to vary widely parish to parish, right? And a lot of it's going to be completely dependent on whoever's actually running that RCIA program, because you might have an incredible priest, but if he puts someone subpar in charge of the RCIA program, that's still going to suck. Now, do good priests usually do that? No, probably not. But like, yeah, you got to be really careful. And I'll be honest, I have no experience with RCIA programs at traditional parishes, because the one that my wife went through was in the exact opposite of a TLM parish, and the head of that RCIA program, had like an extremely gay daughter. They were openly supportive of in every way, including like her gay marriage and things like that. So it was the worst RCIA program imaginable. And after every single class, I would sit down with my wife and basically say, this is where they were wrong. This is where they were wrong. This is where they were wrong. And this, this is the actual teaching. This is the actual teaching.
It's sad that you have to do that.
Right. And so we were literally there just to check the boxes. right? Because I was literally having to unteach her everything that we, were hearing in the class. So you just got to be careful. But I would say if we're talking like just in generalities, you're probably safer in an RCIA program at a TLM parish, probably specifically in like your traditional orders like the FSSP and stuff. But I can't say you're going to be 100% safe there.
Yeah, and I would argue that an interview with whoever that catechist is would be a good idea before you enroll.
Yeah.
Because that could save you a lot of trouble. Once you enroll, it's hard to say like, nah, I'm going to go enroll somewhere else. So
in an ideal world, like I think if you find a really, really good parish and priest, they won't even do an RCIA program. They'll have some sort of like just adult catechesis class that anyone can be a part of. And, they'll probably meet with you one-on-one. And once they feel you're ready, then you'll be brought into the church at that point, and probably not even necessarily as part of the Easter vigil. I think if you find something like that, that's probably a sign that you are actually going to get very good catechesis. But not every parish has the resources, to do that one-on-one with every person interested in coming into the church. So in many cases, an actual RCIA or OCIA program is probably about the only option you have.
I will say this. I think where the church is most broken on teaching people is the actual catechism itself. Like for kids.
Like, I guess what do you mean? Like,
for example,
what do you mean by broken?
For example, I have every kid develops differently, right?
Yeah.
But the way the church runs right now, until you get to second grade, no first confession, no first communion.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that my 6-year-old can absolutely tell the difference between right and wrong, and he knows
100%.
So I just don't see any reason to withhold first confession from a kid like that, and that's where I have a beef with that. And then on top of that, at least when I went through catechism originally, because I guess most people called it CCD at the time. I don't know if they still do or not, but
CCD is a specific program.
Okay, that's what I went through. Yep. And at the end of it, it was like, okay, you graduated now. You're a Catholic. Decide what you want to do. And it's like, what? Hold on. I would never tell my child to go, hey, it's up to you now. Just, decide what you want to do. Like an 8th grader doesn't know what to do. And it's like,
right.
There's no continuing program. So it's like, even if you wanted to go, like in the area I live in, there was no such thing as Life Teen or anything like that. At least nothing that I knew about.
Lucky.
So like I couldn't even go to something like that.
See, we were forced to. Well, it wasn't Life Teen; it was Net, but same idea, right? We are forced.
Is Net Catholic though?
Yes.
Okay.
Net is the National Evangelization Team, but it is specifically Catholic. But yeah, we were forced to go to that once a month as part of confirmation prep.
Well, that was before you got confirmed.
Yes.
And so was that something that would continue on after you were confirmed?
If you wanted, if you were a masochist and really wanted to, yeah.
See, the only like young Christian group in the area I lived in was that Young Life program, which is like a Baptist something or other.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
It's big in the area we live in right now. Yeah.
That was the only thing. And there was like 3 houses within a 5-mile radius of my house growing up that all had their own meetups. And first off, why do you need 3 of them in a 5-mile radius?
Because they all believe different things, like every Protestant, of course.
And secondly, why didn't we have anything like Life Team might be cringe in some ways. I've heard it from lots of people. Like, you're lucky you didn't have Life Team. Like, but I didn't have anything.
You're right. The need is there. It just fills that need in a very bad way. You know what I mean? But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like the church is very bad at that. It's very bad at providing us, a sense of community and continuing catechesis for, teenagers and young adults. It's really bad at it.
Actually, I think one of the best things that's come out in the last decade, actually now it's been like 15 years, was Troops of St. George. If you can find one of those, that's a great place to bring your sons at least.
I've talked with a few guys from our nearest TLM parish, which is 100 miles away, but about starting a Troops of St. George in our area, because like where I live is like the number one destination for Boy Scout like groups in the country, the Boundary Waters. Like we have, you know, probably 20 to 30 Boy Scout groups in the area every weekend throughout the summer. So
there was at least 15 where I grew up.
Yeah. Yeah. Troops. And like, so I don't know why we wouldn't want to create a Catholic version of that here up in this area where,
especially since it's boys only, right?
Yeah.
It's for the same reason that you end up losing all of the altar boys when you have boys and girls both doing it. The Scouts program is going to be dominated by girls in the next, if it isn't already, it's going to be dominated by girls in the next few years.
Yeah. You'll find, I think there'll be more and more offshoot kind of groups starting up specifically for, you know, boys only, to try to fix that. But
yeah, we had one in the area. It's kind of on a hiatus right now, but my son loves that. I mean, he was really enjoying it for the time that we were doing it. And hopefully we'll get it back up and running here soon.
Yeah. It's one thing, you know, I love spending time outdoors with my boys. I think it's a great way to teach skills that are inherently like masculine, you know, skills that are inherently virtuous in terms of just working hard and being in the outdoors, relying on yourself, things like that. But I find being outside and in the outdoors and in nature just provides so many good opportunities to teach kids, especially about the faith.
I guess I'll just ask. I was going to put in the private chat, but how much? Like, I'm assuming we probably need to cut this here soon. I don't want to, unless you're still good. Then I'm happy to keep talking.
I'm used to doing 2 hours, so I mean,
I'm happy to keep going. I don't have a problem. So
whatever you.
I just want to make sure you don't have anywhere to be.
No, I don't. So you're in charge.
All right. We'll go a little bit longer then. All right. Next question for you. So you must have had some kind of a falling away at some point. Was it 8th grade?
No. It was
not. Okay.
Freshman year of college.
It seems like the two spots where you see the dips are 8th grade and freshman year of college.
No, so I was very pious growing up and throughout high school. I was an altar boy. I was an altar boy. We had a group called the Fatima Cadets, which met for first Saturdays and prayed the rosary, had mass on Saturday mornings, and then made rosaries after mass to bring to nursing homes, hospitals, things like that. I did CCD, of course, but we had actually a really, really good CCD program run by two old school Benedictine nuns.
Oh, that's neat.
Who also ran the altar boy program. Our parish was it was one of the first parishes to be granted an indult for the TLM back in the 80s.
Was it a diocesan?
It's diocesan. But the parish was very like bifurcated. You know, you were on the Novus Ordo side or you were on the TLM side, and never shall the two meet in between. So I was on the Novus Ordo side, but our priest and our nuns served both, right? So, you know, our priest was an old school German priest who was very traditional. You know, he did the Novus Ordo because he had to do the Novus Ordo.
Because he had to.
You know, things like that. And this was the 90s and the early 2000s, so there really was no such thing as a unicorn Novus Ordo at the time. You know, even the Novus Ordos he did, which were far better than even some I've seen today, they were still versus populum, you know, things like that. But it was by no means like a clown mass. He made sure of that. And he was, you know, the diocese more or less forced the parish to have altar girls, but our priests and our nuns never let girls serve with boys. The mass either had boy servers or girl servers. Boy servers wore.
Did they let the girls do the TLMs?
No.
Okay.
They didn't even let boys do the TLMs. It was always like the old men who were altar boys back in the day do the TLMs.
Interesting.
But like boys wore the traditional vestments for serving. Girls wore the just like a plain white alb, thing like that.
Yeah.
The boys were given the cool liturgies like Easter Vigil, Good Friday, things like that. Girls were given like the Saturday night anticipatory masses.
Okay.
But so it was a good parish, at least as good of a diocesan parish as you could get in the 90s and early 2000s. And like I said, I was a pretty pious kid. I was the kid that all the old ladies tried to push towards the priesthood, things like that. But kind of later on throughout high school, when we were being forced to go to these like life team sort of masses, and being forced to do a Steubenville conference retreat for confirmation, like I saw that different side of the church, that more modernist, charismatic leaning sort of side of the church in those areas. And it was such a departure from like the
What
faith I was raised into, where it's like, how can these
be compatible?
Right. And I don't want to say like, how can these people, like, I'm not trying to say like they weren't Catholic or anything like that.
No, I think a lot of charismatics are strong in their faith. I think they're just maybe a little misguided in some things.
They are. If it was so different that it was, like you said, how can these be the same? Right. Like, when people are bouncing beach balls, along at a mass in a gym, while our Lord is present on the altar, like, how can you make me go to that and make me, sit through that, and also tell me that everyone here believes that that's the literal God of the universe on the altar? Like, why should I take this stuff seriously if you're not going to take this seriously? And it's not that it caused me to lose belief, because at no point in my life have I ever not believed in like the dogmas of the faith. It was more like, okay, well, if every part of like the hierarchical church doesn't have to take this stuff seriously and can do and live however they want, well, why can't I? So then I go off to college, and it's suddenly like, it's very easy to not go to church every Sunday. It's very easy to not follow all the moral guidelines that you were raised. And you find it very easy to rationalize, well, no one was taking this stuff seriously, while I was living at home. No one else in the church seemed to be. Why do I have to take it seriously now? I'll go and live how I want, and at some later point, I'll come back. And it's very easy. Like I said,
I get that. Yeah, I get that.
I never once believed, like, I always believed, like, if I were to die at this moment, yeah, I might go to hell. But I'm 20.
But you're like, I'm invincible.
Guy.
I'm 20, yeah.
I'm invincible. I got 60 years. But that all changed. That all changed when I realized I was having a son.
Right.
Like, life like came screeching to a halt, and I was like, who cares if you have 60 years still? You're responsible for this little boy's soul. And it's like, so live how you want to, but you still have to provide an example for him. And even at that point, I realized, like, I'd been married for 3 years at that point, outside of the church, but still I had a wife, and it's like, that means I've been failing my wife for years. Faith-wise, because if I'm responsible for his soul, well, then I'm responsible for her soul too. And I've done a really,
you're the headship of that family. Yeah.
Right. I've done a really piss poor job up to this point. So that's how I came back. Spent about 12 years away. Like I said, not faith-wise, but definitely action-wise.
Yeah, I pretty much was one of those. As soon as my parents gave me a choice, I stopped going.
Yeah.
Like, literally. Like, so like 8th grade. I think it was probably more like 9th, 10th grade, because my brother had to finish his catechism too. So it's probably like 9th or 10th grade. But as soon as I had a choice, I was done. And then I went to school in Dearborn, Michigan,
okay,
where you've got Chaldeans, Muslims. You got a bunch of different Indian religions like Hinduism and other stuff like that. There's like the Buddhism with some of the foreign immigrants for that. Like the school has tons of people.
Okay.
And one day I saw, and my wife was a big part of my conversion. That's a totally different part of it, but reversion, not conversion. I didn't convert. I saw the Muslims in the bathroom washing up, and I'm like, what are you guys doing? Because like, they're just washing like all the way up their arms, and they're taking off their pants up, and they're cleaning their legs. And I'm like, what the heck is going on in here? And so then as soon as I see like how seriously they're taking their faith, I'm like, well, what the heck have I been doing? You know? And so I started like questioning things. And then I saw Father John Ricardo. I went to one of his masses. I don't know if you know who that is.
It sounds familiar, but
he's the Acts 29 priest. He does the Rescue Project. It's a pretty good program. I don't know if you ever heard of it. Anyways, I saw one of his homilies and I actually found it the other day. He still got it hosted up on his website because they would record it and put it on the radio quite a bit back when that was still pretty prevalent. But I went infrequently at that point because I was like, well, what the heck am I doing? If these guys take their faith that seriously, what the heck am I doing?
Yeah.
And then my wife and I got together and she takes it very seriously. And so
was she Catholic?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep. That my father-in-law's Catholic. She's Catholic. Their whole family's Catholic.
That makes sense. Yep.
Unlike my own dad, but that's a whole different baptized Catholic, but ask him the last time he went. That wasn't a wedding, a funeral, or something important that my kids are doing.
Right.
He can't. Anyways, so my conversion was through seeing kind of the extreme of the Muslim religion, and then my wife, and that's how I came back to the faith. So
okay,
and I had a wedding and all the good stuff with that.
Good.
So that's the short version. Maybe one of these days I can explain how seeing some of the interactions between Chaldeans and Muslims really helped. I said some of it on my conversation with Enoch, but that's a very long story.
With him, with his heritage, that would have been a good time for it. I've never told the full story, not even on our old channel. And I don't know when or if I ever will, but
there's a lot more going on with that, huh?
A little bit, the detail that doesn't add much, and it's like, so everyone on our channel has heard Anthony and all his numerous stories about his.
I heard the story about the car.
Okay, yeah, so that's about the wild. That's the wildest one, right? So when I told him my whole story, he's like, "Yeah, you might want to leave some of that out." I'm like, "Oh, if you're saying that,
okay." That's a good test. That's a good test.
Exactly.
Oh man, I guess just briefly, I had a series of events that, had they not happened exactly the way they happened, my wife and I would have never gotten together. And I can only think it was through some kind of intervention, divine or otherwise, that everything happened the way it did. And so if I ever tell that story, I got to write it all down first because I'll forget something and then I'll tell it again. And somebody will be like, "You boomer, you forgot this." But it's a long and really, the reason I lost my faith entirely was because of a bad relationship before my wife. I mean, it completely destroyed anything I had. So
I understand that. Yeah.
So, all right, let me think if there's any other trivia I can ask you. We got like 10 minutes left. Nobody's put any trivia in the chat, even though they all threatened to. Everybody's like, "We're going to put trivia in for Rob." And
I mean, if anyone's got any other random questions for me,
here's the book I was quoting from, FYI. Ottonian Germany. So that's one part of the quote. It's a German quote. If you can figure out where the Ottonian Germany, what period that was from, they'll get you pretty close. And then if you figure out who wrote the book, I'm sure you can figure out who the quote is from. Has anybody got any guesses? Let's see. I'll put that back up there again. Nowadays, the freedom to sin dominates everywhere and to a degree that is not normal. That's the opening part of the quote. And it came from a German bishop.
I mean, imagine Ottonian Germany is speaking about like Otto the Great.
That's the quote close to the time frame. Attonian Germany goes through at least 5 generations of kings, actually emperors. It goes into the Holy Roman Emperor,
right,
at some point.
I mean, so you'd have the 3 Ottos, and then probably
the 3 Ottos.
Henry I and Henry II.
I think it even talks about Henry III for a brief period.
Okay.
Could
so
be wrong
who
about
would
that.
write in that period?
It's not who you're suspecting. I tell you that. I got this book specifically because my kids were interested in stories about saints with the same name as them.
Okay.
And you know who's documented as one of the 3 Henrys, right? The only Holy Roman Emperor during the Attonian Germany who is a saint.
Is that Henry II?
Henry II, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But it's not him.
It's not him. It's the bishop. Henry's not a bishop.
Is it, just thinking about the Holy Roman Empire in that period, is it like the Archbishop of Mainz?
No, but he's mentioned in there.
Yeah.
Gosh. It's half of this book is him complaining that his diocese has not been raised to the level of an archbishopric again. He's like, and they promised I would get this, and then I love it when a book
some things never change, right?
Like goes on and on about something that has nothing to do with the story. You know what one of the miracles he cites for Henry II in this is?
What?
They're looking for an adulterous priest, and Henry raises his sword, and the house with the adulterous priest and the woman literally just falls apart, and they find him. That's one of the miracles of Henry II. Just so you know.
That's so much more interesting than like, oh, such and such had cancer and suddenly they don't. This must be a miracle. Yeah, not that that's bad. I don't want to make that sounds terrible. But like that's good.
Hilarious that this guy just raises a sword or whatever it was. Just the house collapses. They find the adulterous priest. It's like, oh my goodness.
Oh man.
Can you imagine being in that house and like just falls apart? Not that you would be in that house, but
no, yeah.
It's kind of one of the wildest things I've ever heard, is being a quote unquote miracle.
Like, yeah, that is funny.
Like I've got the hagiography of Saint Edward the Confessor, and he's got some super interesting stories too.
Huh?
You know what hagiography is, right? It's like the Golden Legends, the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
I just choose to believe it because who cares?
Catholicism was so much more interesting, you know, like
I don't care if the George and the Dragon was a giant crocodile. I mean, he's a dragon. He fought a freaking dragon, and that's it. End of story.
Yep.
You don't need to ruin it with this whole who knows if dragons were no. He fought a freaking dragon.
It's an allegory for sin. No, shut up. It's a dragon.
Yeah, exactly. You get where I'm coming from here.
Yeah.
Okay. I will give it to you since I was a little cruel with this one. This was a very specific quote, but it's funny to me because 1,000 years ago, some dude said that, and I'm like, imagine if this guy were alive today.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Henry II would raise his sword and whole cities would fall down.
Right. So it's the Chronicon of Thientmar of Merseburg.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I was so close to getting that.
I mean, Mainz is not, you actually weren't that far off. I mean, that's like not that far away, I don't think. Because I don't think this has ever been restored to an actual, let me see. Mainz is, I don't think it's on his map. Anyway. Yeah, so he was hoping the whole time. He's like, this is going to get re-raised to an arch. Nope. And they're going to rebuild my church. Nope.
Yeah, that whole diocese probably has 20 Catholics in it right now.
Probably. I mean, and the time frame was around 1100, in case you're wondering. So, ish. But he documents all of the Ottos. If you're ever interested, this is a great book to learn about
the early Roman Empire.
The early Holy Roman Empire, yes. And it's funny, he actually just totally craps on Duke Henry, the father of Henry II, for like a whole section of the book. And then suddenly everything's okay, and Henry II is the new emperor, and everything's good, and we love Henry, Duke of Bavaria, or whatever he was. And it's like, yeah, I don't buy that.
People will look at events and personalities today, right, in terms of like politics and thing like that, and they'll think it's something new or unique to our period, and it's like, people have been like this forever. Like you'll have some sycophant change there too, and from one president to the next or whatever. It's like, no, right. People have been doing that literally forever.
Literally forever. All right, one more deeper question for you.
Okay.
Do you think describing political factions in the United States as right and left even makes sense?
No. I mean,
I've thought about this a lot lately. I'm like, but the right was the monarchists.
Yeah, it's Twitter especially is so frustrating when you see people describe themselves as conservative, and it's like, no, 200 years ago you would have been a raving liberal, like they executed, like no, you're not a conservative. Like, no, the Daily Wire is not conservative. They're not like progressive.
Classical liberal. They're like classical liberal.
Right. Yeah.
They're about expansion of rights, but they're not right leaning. Like, really, they're not right leaning.
No, to be conservative, you have to be wanting to conserve, or at this point, really restore Christendom. That's what conservatism is, right? It's conserving the old system of Europe, the old. When I say the old West, I'm not talking about Western movies, but you know what I mean. Like, it's conserving Western civilization.
Very offended with my Native American heritage. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Not kidding about the heritage, but kidding about being offended.
Yeah. Contrary to popular belief in this country, Western civilization didn't start in 1776. It can be said almost to like the end began in 1776.
You could almost argue that is the beginning of liberalism.
Yeah. I mean, I would say more of the English Civil War probably was, right? Yeah, probably. But it was realized, like, the American Revolution really is a second English Civil War just happening over here on the
it's like the English-French Revolution practically. Almost, except because the king is across the sea, they don't kill him.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, really, that's it.
Yeah. It really is. But yeah, so I don't know, right and left, it doesn't make any sense, but it's not like we're going to change it, not until the whole system falls apart. So it's one of those things I used to argue about on Twitter all the time. Like, anytime I saw someone call themselves conservative, I couldn't help myself but like comment like, no, you're really not. But it's just not worth it. It's really, we're not going to win that fight. But no, it's a completely inaccurate.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, really, if the American Revolution had happened in England, it would have been crazy. Yeah. We wouldn't have won, not with the numbers we had, but it would have been crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason we did win is because
the French.
Well,
good degree.
There was no way in which the island of Great Britain was going to enforce its will on a more populous continent halfway around the world forever, right?
Eventually, the population would have outpaced by a long shot.
Right. So either the only way Britain would have won would be if they had, in a sense, capitulated, right, to more of the demands and kind of acted in a conciliatory way. And maybe then we stay part of, maybe we'd be part of the Dominion or whatever it's called today.
Commonwealth.
Right. The Commonwealth of Nations or whatever. Or if the founders had less will and capitulated, at some of the moments they almost did when things were going bad. But if they had held their will and just had to continue, even if like the French hadn't arrived to blockade the English retreat at Yorktown, like it could have gone on years longer, but there was no way in which Britain was going to end up really winning that long term.
I think the only way the English monarchs could have maintained any kind of control over America is if they had moved the monarchy to the New World. Imagine if they would have established the Kingdom of America and they would have ruled the Isles from America.
Oh, so I think there's two possibilities there. I think if they had given us representation in Parliament, right?
Yeah.
And done so in a representative sort of like population based, method, eventually like the American colonies in a sense would have had control over Parliament, right? And then maybe, like you said, maybe
because there would have been so many of parliamentary people from
America as opposed to
and then the monarchy would have naturally wanted to move over here anyways,
potentially. Yeah, so I could foresee that, or I could foresee them doing a sort of like dual kingdom in a way where you have America with its own sort of parliamentary or government sort of system with George III or whoever as the head of state, as king of America, and that that monarch is also just king of Great Britain as well, sort of dual monarchy sort of way, in which, similar to the Habsburgs, where you had the Habsburg, the head of the Habsburg family was Emperor of Austria, Duke of Austria, but was also king of Hungary and king of Bohemia and king of Croatia, and they were all separate kingdoms, just united under a single king. Maybe something like that would have potentially worked in America.
Yeah, because if I remember correctly, when the British controlled the various colonies and the various whatever I call the Commonwealth, because they had India, they had Canada to a degree, they had the Americas, they had did they have Colombia? They had Colombia, right?
I'm not so solid on the
I know they had
South
Jamaica.
African possessions. They had Jamaica, they had the Bahamas,
they had the Boers, right? Or they fought the Boers.
Well, they took control over the Dutch colony, but that was in the late 1800s.
That was later, yeah. Anyways, that suffice to say, the bulk of the areas they controlled were military occupations,
or even, in a sense, corporate occupations. Like India was the East India Company,
right?
Which was a British possession, but it's not like it was controlled by the British government.
It almost was like bigger than the British government.
In many ways, it was, yeah.
Which is a wild. We should explore that. So I'll have you back on. We'll talk about the East India Trading Company. That'd be
I'll have to do some research, but that would be fun. Yeah,
it'd be a fun discussion, because corporate capture of government is something that would be interesting to discuss, considering where we're at with America right now.
Yeah.
So,
in a way, like the Chinese are kind of doing it with Africa right now.
Yeah.
Right. Their state-owned corporations have such large interests in Africa, and in many cases almost like enslave large number of Africans to produce minerals or resources for these state-owned corporations.
Well, I mean, that's why it's so interesting that in Michigan they want to put in a Chinese-owned battery factory. Like, to me, that's dangerous.
Yeah, that's not good. That's not a good thing.
I agree with you. I think any kind of foreign enterprise that large is bad. So anyway, we did cross over our 2 hours. Do you have any questions for me?
I don't think so.
I mean, I know I've been all over the place, so there's a lot of tidbits we could find in here that somebody.
Yeah, we could probably go another hour, but
probably not good for either of us to do.
I was gonna say it's got to be what, 10:30 for you?
It's well, I'm not an early sleeper, but Yes, I agree. Eventually, my brain will start to do one of these. Crash and burn. But it's been fun having you on, though, Rob. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been good.
It's fun to hear you actually speaking without Anthony, jumping in every 5 seconds. But
everyone is saying this is the most I've spoken. Probably true.
Yeah, hopefully I didn't interrupt you too many times.
No, way less than I'm used to.
I feel like the best way to handle these kinds of things is when you ask a question, let them finish what they're saying before you ask the next question.
And it's something I need, especially as like a phlegmatic melancholic, is like I need that time to develop what I'm thinking and saying, whereas Anthony will just continue to go off like, he's 10 words ahead of where his brain is at that point.
Apparently this is the best stream ever, Rob. Let Anthony know that.
Yeah, we'll have to let him know that.
I hope you enjoyed your time here, and I'd love to have you on again in the future, so keep that in mind.
Yeah, we'll have to do that, and we'll have to have you on too. I don't, you might get, Anthony might reach out to you to see if you would want to do a trivia on Thursday, maybe.
He already has.
He has? Okay.
Yes, he already has. He was very cryptic about it at first because he's like, "Are you available Thursday?" And I'm like, "Well, there's no time involved in what you just asked me, so probably."
There is a period of time in which I'm available sometime on Thursday. Yes, Ant.
It's like, probably, I don't know. And then he comes back and says, "Oh, 8 o'clock." It's like, yeah, Anthony. It's the way he speaks.
Yes, it is.
So anyway, Rob, I appreciate you being on here. I'm going to roll the credits, and then if you want to chat for a couple of minutes or if you want to jump off, either way is fine.
Okay.
So, all right. As always, I'm Chris from Crash Canon, and that was Rob. If you're subscribed to my podcast, one of the 60 or so that were subscribed to mine, but somehow weren't subscribed to Avoiding Babylon, stop avoiding Babylon and start subscribing. So,
and if you're on Avoiding Babylon right now, head over to Crash Canon and subscribe to Chris.
I appreciate that. And we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.